सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
It's easy enough for me to say that this is one more unusual episode of Clutter. I do say that every once in a while, at least once every few months. This, however, is more than unusual. This, if I might admit to you, is a case of me indulging myself, my generation, and my own fans' hero worship. So I'm a hard-nosed journalist. It's very difficult for me. I'm much too skeptical by training to become a fan of somebody or a fanboy, which is the much used expression these days, of somebody. But if there's one person in the world of cinema, it's very easy for me to become fans with people in the world of sport. If I start that, maybe I will list 15, 20, 30, maybe even 50 with you. If you gave me a quiz test, I would do that. But movies, entertainment, very few. And there, if there is one man who I could say that I've been a fan of all my life, that is the man whose birth centenary is being observed this week. In fact, 26th of September was the 100th birth anniversary of Dev Anand. I'm sure you've figured out by now who I'm talking about. So Dev Anand, reporters, journalists sometimes have luck, and that luck places them in situations where they never thought they might be. One of those situations or one of those cases of happenstance or reporters' luck placed me also in the proximity of Dev Anand, that there developed a relationship, you might call it a friendship, that went on for almost 20 years after that. So once Dev Anand passed away, when he passed away, I did write an obituary on him. Before that, we had many long conversations, and I had also recorded not one, not two, but 3 episodes of Walk the Talk interviews with him for NDTV. The last one was after his autobiography had come out, Romancing with Life. Do check that book out. It's quite an honest book. Now, Dev Anand, in the obituary, I headlined the obituary, Deeply in Love with Life and Himself. And then I went on to say, Close Encounters with Dev Anand, Memories and Lots of Lessons in Stardom, and Catching the Best Light. Now, I will explain all of this to you because each one of these gives us an insight into the heart and mind and the ideas and method of one of the biggest, longest lasting evergreen stars in our film world. Now, this is the centenary week. I know that some multiplexes are holding retrospectives of Dev Anand's famous movies. Do they check those out? We also know the adjectives that will be repeated often as tributes pour in for him. Evergreen, ageless, romantic, debonair, so on and so forth. We all also know that he romanced 3 generations of Indian women. My mother loved him, and my daughter adores him, and women of my generation, well, watch any of his movies, even the ones he did starring himself as some sort of a ridiculous caricature of a romantic lead in his 70s and 80s. He was incorrigible, and he still had that one incredible quality. He so looked in love with the woman he was romancing on camera. And through his younger, romance-laden 50s and 60s, he easily convinced a woman watching him on screen that he was in love with her too. Yet, Dev Anand's entire life, career, sex appeal and mystique were built on a great contradiction. That Dev Anand seemed to love any woman he looked at, but never really loved anybody. Well, nobody except one or maybe 2. But more about that as we go along. Now you might ask me a good question. Shekhar Gupta, what are your credentials to write about a film star? My professional life is consumed in decoding rotten politics and mundane governance. You can get away with writing a bit on sports as I do. We are after all a nation of 1.4 plus billion cricket coaches. But cinema, I have to say in my defense though, that most of the films I escaped from my small town schools to watch had Dev Anand in them. Guide in 1965 when I was in class 5. Prem Pujari in 1970 when I was in class 10. In between, Jewel Thief in 1967. Teen Devya. Teen Devya in 1965, it was an adults-only film, so it wasn't possible at that point, and I was too young then to still smuggle myself into a cinema hall, but I did catch Teen Devya later. Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Tere Mere Sapne. Many of his films were ahead of his times and ahead of our times as well as early teenagers. But you always walked out of this sultry small town hall copying Dev Anand's Leaning Tower Gate, his mannerism, and always hummed his songs cycling back home. Dilip Kumar and Raj Kapoor, who formed the holy trinity of Indian cinema in that era with Dev Anand, had oodles of talent and versatility. Maybe more than Dev Anand, but nobody could match Dev Anand for style. Dev Anand's hero rarely beat up the bad guy in a movie. He was, on the other hand, thrashed often enough in films like The Path-Breaking Jal, Johnny Mera Naam, Hum Dono, Barish, and when he was beaten up, he raised himself bleeding from a split lip, my favorite being Prem Pujari. You didn't merely feel sorry for him. If you were a woman, you found him even more desirable. If you were a man, oddly, you wished you could be in his place. My justification for writing about Dev Anand while he was alive, interviewing him several times, and also continuing now to talk about him does not come from being a lifelong Dev Anand fan. It comes from getting to know him over 15 years, over the last 15, 17 years of his life, when he wasn't doing very much except indulging himself now and then with a dud. But he would never condescend to do a character role suiting his age in anybody's movie. As he would tell me when I would pull his leg, asking why doesn't he do these character roles? Why doesn't he become uncle, father-in-law, father, stuff like that? And he would then say, in the true Dev Anand style, a star is always a star, Shekhar, and a star has to be predictable. You are too simple to understand this. Once you become a star, you have to lead a star's life forever. Stardom is like your skin. You either lose it or die in it. That's what Dev Anand said exactly. I got a taste of his understanding of stardom and my lack of it soon enough, recording our first Walk the Talk for NDTV 24/7 in 2003. We sat for the concluding part on a bench in the crumbling fort at Bandra's Land's End. I inadvertently or instinctively sat on his right. Dev Anand grabbed my elbow and pushed me to the left edge while he came around and sat to my right instead. The sun was setting and this way his face would get the best light. I was mystified as to why he had done it, and the producer quietly explained to me later that, sir, he understands where the light is. A star should know where the light is and a star must take the light. So the sun was setting in Mumbai and this way his face to the right, this way his face would get the best light. And I could be in the star shadow, of course. And then I belatedly figured out also why in the entire course of that interview he was constantly moving about without any seeming reason. It was to take the best light, and we were recording in those rocks by the Land's End in the sea, by the sea, and those rocks are very unstable, and a couple of times it looked like he was staggering and he might fall, and I pretended to give him support, but he just jerked me away because a star must never be seen to be taking anybody's support, even in their 70s and 80s. That's why Dev Anand, even in his late 80s, dressed as he did in his younger days. Scarf, freshly polished shoes, checked shirt with oversized collar. The works. Not a piece was missing from the picture, whether you met him late morning, evening, a glass of whiskey was added, and then it became second glass and more, or even on an overnight Air India, London, Delhi, Mumbai flight, which is where I found him for the first time. As I walked into that nightly Delhi-Bombay connection, Air India connection in 1997, I just saw a stylish gingham cap bobbing up and down as its wearer shuffled for comfort. Who else but Dev Anand would fly all the way from London wearing a cap like this, I thought. I went and introduced myself, exchanged numbers. We renewed acquaintance some months later in more dramatic circumstances. I was walking past the lobby of Manhattan's Lexington Hotel, then run by the Taj Group and a favorite Indian hangout then, when a familiar voice came booming out of the half-exposed bar. "Kahan chale Shekhar? Idhar aao, meet these lovely ladies." There was Dev Anand auditioning 4 very young and very attractive women for his next film, set in New York. I gulped a glass of wine nervously and bolted, but could not help noticing that Dev Anand seemed in love with all 4 of them at the same time. He would have found it a wrench to drop 3 out of 4. He chose one though, and that film, as you would expect, also bombed because he was too old to be a star. We'll come to that in a minute. From star and fan, we inevitably became friends. He invited me home many times. He was generous with affection, stories of a colorful past, and of course with Black Label. The stories of his celebrated romance with Suraya. But mind you, Shekhar, it was romance, not quite love, maybe even puppy love, he would say. He was besotted with Suraya. She in turn adored Gregory Peck and was so excited once when she heard that Gregory Peck was coming to town, he even set up a coffee or chai date with him. Dev Saab was honest enough to admit that this is what inspired him to style some of his mannerisms after Gregory Peck. Remember from The Guns of Nevron and many others? Of course, my generation discovered Gregory Peck through The Guns of Nevron. Dev Anand spoke freely about his other co-stars. Wahida Rahman had incredible talent and discipline. The first truly professional Indian star, woman star of his times, he said. Wahida Rahman, by the way, this week was given the Dada Saheb Phalke Award. Nutan was really classy but ziddi, he said, and made poor choices in her personal life. Vaijayanti Mala, just past 90, was dancing on her 90th birthday. Vaijayanti Mala was from another planet but could dance her way out of anything. As we see now, she's dancing even at 90. Simi Grewal, he said, was the first really modern English-speaking woman in Hindi cinema of the 60s. Nobody quite knew what to do with her, particularly when she was so talented but slim and sexy in a Western style. "Did you see her in Teen Deviyan?" He asked. "Did you see her in Teen Deviyan?" Brilliant, but so un-Indian then. And Madhubala, well, and I say this with apologies to Madhubala's fans, I'm her fan too. So I say it with apologies to all Madhubala fans. He said, Madhubala, she was so beautiful. But you know what? Itna roz nahati nahi thi, aisa lagta tha. So the body odor was a problem. His face romanced each one of his leading ladies as he talked about them. As he talked about them to me. Because you could see it in his eyes. You could see romance in his eyes. But once again, remember the distinction he made between romance and love. So it looked like love. He looked to be in love only when he talked about one person, the youngest of them all. That is Zeenat Aman. Zeenat was the only woman he truly fell in love with. He claimed she was incredible, so classy, so sexy, had so much attitude. My first look at her, and I knew she was the lead for Hare Rama, Hare Krishna. He also fell for her at first sight, he said. This was the only love he talked about in some detail, also in his autobiography, Romancing with Life, which I mentioned earlier. And of how he felt jilted when she shifted loyalties to Raj Kapoor, ditching him rather Hindi film style. This is Dev Anand's version. Zeenat Aman disagrees with it. She disputes it. In fact, she put out an Instagram post questioning this. He claimed that she ditched him Hindi film style by preferring to go for a Kapoor party dressed in something she would rarely wear, a white sari, while he waited for her at a candlelight dinner at Zodiac Grill where he wanted to propose to her, sort of formally. But he says Zeenat really wanted that role in Raj Kapoor's film Satyam Shivam Sundaram. We've seen that for 1978, so we can guess that this episode must have been somewhere around 1976 or so. Just think about it. At that point, Zeenat Aman would have been about 25. And at that time, Dev Anand was already well into his 50s. So when you think you are in love, you can also be delusional. Once again, this is his account that Zeenat Aman has firmly disputed in her Instagram posts. Now you also know why I said he only loved one woman, or at least said he loved one woman. And I said maybe two, because there was some love for Suraya and Kalpana Karthik, the very young Miss Shimla he married and co-starred with in hits like Naudo Gyara and Bazi. Mia Nawaz Sharif of Pakistan is among the most passionately knowledgeable Hindi film enthusiasts anywhere. He asked me once in a conversation how old Dev Anand was and whether he could still walk without support, etc. This was in 1998 and Dev Saab was a sprightly 74, 75 then. What a nice idea if you could get him to come to Lahore, he said. And sure enough, when Vajpayee's bus trip to Lahore was set up, through an interview Nawaz Sharif gave to me, he asked me again if Dev Anand could be on that bus as well. Our PMO got on the job immediately on the night preceding the visit, reached out to Dev Sahab, and sure enough, he was on that bus the next morning. Of course, once he reached Lahore, he was the star. Cameras followed as he discovered the old spots in Lahore, including his college. This is where I had my first crush. This is where I had my first kiss, first breakup, and so on. And the Pakistani cameras fed on all of this, feasted on all of this. For a while, we even wondered what he had come to cover: the Vajpayee-Nawaz Sharif summit or a most famous Lahori exile's homecoming. A less known fact about Dev Anand is how politically aware he was. In a nation where artists and entertainers stay out of all politics, he led the only protest carried out by Creative India against the emergency. Maybe some of it came from his left-leaning college days in Lahore, but because he was so interested and curious in politics, history, the world around him, that it was such a delight even for a non-film journalist like me to converse with him. His curiosity about my life and years as a reporter too was never ending. Sometimes on those long evenings that usually went into early hours of the morning, high-spirited long evenings, I would end up telling him stories from the pickets, trenches, minefields and snipers' alleys, just as I might tell my children, or might bore my children by telling them and retelling them. And he listened just as curiously as any children would. So he said to me one day, "Shekhar, let me make a film on your life." I said, "Thank you, Dev Saab." And then it was such a funny idea. And he said, "No, there will be a journalist like you who goes from one battlefield to another, Nagaland, Mizoram, Manipur, under tribal insurgencies, Amritsar under Bhindranwale and Operation Blue Star, the massacres at Delhi and in Delhi after Indira Gandhi's assassination, Afghanistan and Pakistan, and the first jihad against the Soviets, Jaffna under LTT, you know how he spoke, Jaffna under LTT, and IPKF, Baghdad's Al-Rashid Hotel, Jerusalem under Scud missile attacks in the first Gulf War. He remembered all the various stops in my years of reporting conflict that I had told him about. And then he went on to say, there will be many, many interesting women in this reporter's life, including an ambitious politician, a Pakistani spy, and a pretty American journalist. What a film it will turn out to be, Shekhar. Socho zara. Think about it. I asked him cheekily, "Dev Saab, who will play me in your film?" He thought for a moment and said, "For the younger phase, we'll have to find somebody. Lekin thoda senior hone ke baad," he said, of course, he would be playing that lead role himself. That film obviously never got made, sadly. I will never have the privilege of Dev Anand playing me even at the age 80. I laughed then at his audacity to play me, not young by any definition, but 35 years his junior. But later understood this was all a part of his mystique of agelessness. It looked real because he believed it was so. He believed it was so because Dev Anand was really a man deeply in love with life and himself.